Okay, let's begin. 18th century Ottoman architecture. Let me share my PowerPoint presentation after checking some details from my body, hiding my clock and watch and other details. Okay, here it is. Today's topic going to be 18th century Ottoman architecture. Until recently, this period has been named Baroque period in Ottoman architecture, Ottoman Baroque, Westernization, and so forth. But after having recent decade studies done on the topic by myself and by the others, I personally, I don't know the others, but I personally decided not to call this age Baroque age in Ottoman architecture and regard it as a century where cross-cultural relations intensified, specifically in a dimension we might define as a more global scenery in terms of Western European involvement in global scale. Until that date, until the 18th century, the impact of Western Europe was greatly restricted, limited to the colonies in Americas, in Southern Asia, and mostly delineated by Portuguese and Spanish impacts. But now we have spread of English and French dominion all over the world, and trade relations greatly defined by this new age. It is still the age of colonization, and the circle of this political and commercial reality extended now to the Middle East, and the impacts of this can be traced in the culture of the people who lived in this part of the world. This is just a very brief introduction to the topic. Let's remind ourselves what existed before 18th century in Ottoman architecture. Remember, we have dealt with great building complexes in Istanbul and elsewhere, like Şehzade, Selimiye. By themselves, I mean, they are really great buildings, inventive mind of Sinan, architect Sinan, can be traced in the design and placements of the buildings. The way these monuments placed in the towns, countrysides, structural systems, design of the structural system, and the ornamental details altogether presented us a period of inventiveness and creativeness altogether symbolized by architect Sinan. But we did not deal these monuments as part of an urban fabric, since these monuments inserted within the existing urban fabrics or countryside, as individual compounds. I mean, without being integrated with the urban environments. I also emphasize the fact that they are in tune with the natural environment, since they are crowning hills in Istanbul, in Bursa, in Edirne, but mostly in Bursa and Istanbul. They're crowning hills, and these hills provided those monuments an appropriate, in a way, how can I say, configuration in relation to the existing topography due to the existing natural formation of the lands. On top of a hill, you create a great building with a dome, creating a kind of pyramid surrounding the hill. It is there is nothing against any I don't know, any canon of beauty, any canon of design orders. I mean, as we greatly appreciated those monuments, especially in terms of the modular system employed, human proportions, and the way integration introduced by means of gradation and so forth. Okay, this is good, but this is actually limited at a individual scale of the monument. I mean, these monuments are, especially the mosque section in itself is great, but these buildings are encircled by great walls, as in Shehzade example, because the designer and the founder would like to create a heaven in itself. I mean, a kind of secluded realm for prayer, for education. I mean, for even a royal presence, because Sultan visited those monuments during Friday prayer time, Cuma Selamlı, and he would like to create a realm for himself as well. This is secondary to the other issues, I mean, religious and social issues, but it's still a fact. And what we have here, really a kind of separated realm from the turmoil of the city. This was deliberately done. And great walls like this in the Khalid Ali Pasha Mosque separated those monuments from the urban fabric. I mean, this is a way to introduce a kind of islands in sea. I mean, the sea is the city itself, or the town, wherever the building is, and the island is the building complex, the külliye. I mean, a manifestation of Ottoman identity, royal identity, religious identity, cultural identities as well, because we have madrasas and other buildings in relation to the different groups with different cultures. I mean, dynastic symbolism, the turba, as you can see here in this example. This is a reality of 16th and 17th century Ottoman architecture, which is to be greatly changed in the 18th century. People are not much aware of these kind of transformations in Turkey. I mean, we greatly find urban change. I mean, the urban planning attempts in relation to 20th century modernism. But my son, these already existed in the Ottoman world and started in the 18th century. Transformation of the towns in relation to the global changes. This is the topic of today's lecture. I hope you're gonna enjoy it, because this is really a different phase, which greatly related to contemporary discussions in the field of architecture and other fields in relation to it. Edirne Selimiye is another example of this sort of a building on top of a hill with great walls enclosing it within the domain it is. I mean, there is no direct access to the monuments by means of visual accessibility. You enter by this gate, you first reach to the Bedestan, then from Bedestan you reach to the mosque, or from another gate. I mean, this gate is on walls separating the monument from the city. Actually, the building itself is far from the city. It's on top of a hill. When it is in the city, like Bursa Great Mosque or Edirne Great Mosque, Edirne Camisi, and Eski Cami, we call it in Edirne, they are built with great walls, very thick, enclosed great walls, and these walls also create barriers. There is no attempt to relate interior of the monument to outside, introducing it great windows, combining different elements you know, for example, türbe, işte, fountain, gates, combining, you know, the Baroque details we find in 17th century Rome, for example, you know, are lacking in this tradition. Within the body itself, the building itself, we can trace kind of Baroque integration search for Sinan, you know, but this was it's an independent development from earlier classicism. We name it Baroque today, but nobody named it Baroque in the time these kind of integrations reached. This has nothing to do with 17th century European Baroque. In 17th century European Baroque, we have an urban planning attempt in Rome of the Popes, as you can you see. A similar development occurred in 18th century Istanbul. The city planned in a different way. That will be illustrated here. Süleymaniye again, on top of a hill with great walls separating it from the city. It is like an island, as you can see here, in the sea of the town. Evet. What else changed? The change will be introduced to later on. Another building type that greatly changed is the fountain. A typical 17th and 16th century fountain is a water faucet, just a water faucet with an arch. You can see, you know, to provide water to passerbys or to the neighborhood. I mean, people from houses could come to this fountain and have water in felt, I don't know, storage, I don't know, vessels, and carry to their houses. These sort of fountains were built at the corners, like in this example, crossroads usually, providing even water to be, you know, taken from these small niches with water faucets, or a greater arched recess for, you know, the people who carry water from fountains to houses. We name these people Saka people, who regarded this task a professional job and provided money from this work, carrying water from fountains. This is fresh and clean water. In houses, they had cisterns, and they used stagnant water. This is not good to drink. I mean, for daily use, it is nice, but not good for drink. And drinking water provided from the fountains, and Saka people had them. They carried water from these fountains to houses. These fountains were very simple structures without any urban feature, except being a very functional, you know, architectural elements. You go there and take fountain. So simple. Though in towns, in small towns in Anatolia, fountain signified domains other than, you know, functional. For example, socializing, you know, around the fountain, ladies visiting fountain would chat around, sit, and even, you know, they would clean their dress for a while and spend time. In small towns, this existed, but in a city like Istanbul, it was not possible, and fountains were not social centers, as far as we know. This is to be changed, but how? I mean, this is also urbanized. I mean, like great complexes, these fountains also become urbanized. This, I can say so, from the transformation that occurred in the 18th century. Another example is a sebil. Sebil is different than a fountain. Fountain, the water in the fountain is directly accessible. You go to the fountain and take your water. But in a sebil, there is somebody inside. There is somebody inside. and he who uses or who used, I don't know, still used, but not an example, still functioning in the past. There's somebody inside provided you water in cups. Water distribution was possible by this way. Water faucet is inside this Sebel now. It's not outside, but inside the Sebel. And somebody there helped people passing by, providing them water and, extending a cup without any payment. Sebil actually itself is an Arabic word, which means, for the sake of God. Sebil. Sebilullah, yani, God's offer. This Sebil is from Istanbul again, at Şehzadebaşı. Gazanfer Ağa Madrasa Sebil is in the classical style. It is a building almost separately placed, attached to one of the walls of the külliye. When you look at the order introduced, for example, in this, arched units and the arcade credited by them altogether, we have classical order, really a great classical monument. And the eaves are also very typical of 16th century eaves. This not even protruding, this attached Sebil has no relationship with the back wall. There is no connecting element, pay attention, between this wall and the Sebil. There's this entrance gate also protruding from the body of the wall. In a way, its independence, its individuality is underlined. It is the kind of portal which is there with its all characteristics. I mean, there is no attempt to relate it to this wall. The wall is open compared to the others. It's more open even, but still we have a great wall with angled windows. There is no connecting element again between those windows, and this cornice also is very robust, as you can see, in the traditional style. In Bayrams, in festivity days, benefactors would offer sherbet, and fruit juice, kind of sweet fruit juice, to the passerbys, again without payment, during Ramadan also. Then Sebil is a place, water distribution is possible. This function, people gathering around Sebil to have refreshments, had a great potential, urban potential, let me tell you as such. This potential is to become greatly redefined in the 18th century, and Sebils will also be urbanized. But how? I will be talking more on this. There's great example from 18th century, Mihri Shah Türbe, 1796, is an example that incorporates Rococo elements, French influence. And you can see how undulating eave and the convoluting forms like those altogether in a way introduce us with new tendencies of the 18th century from here to there. As you can see now, Sebil, together with the fountains on the two sides, are related to the walls of the monument. In a way, it is still separate. But I don't know, the ornamental details and other features, and this cornice-like eave, a great cornice-like eave, altogether in a way embrace also the walls like wings now extended from the Sibyl and the fountains at the center. But we have in the 18th century developments to, how can I say, to relate different parts to each other and to open the monument to the urban fabric. In this case, this is the street that leads to Eyüp Sultan, the türbe of Eyüp El Ensari. And Ottoman tombs also exist, right and left. Just a brief and quick look at what happened in the 18th century in order to, introduce a full stop to this introduction. Socio-political background. Let me briefly deal with this as I do in every lecture in the beginning. What happened at the end of the 17th century? A great defeat, Vienna defeat in 1683, signaled the beginning of the Ottoman retrogression, yani retrogression, stagnation in general. At the end of this war, the allies, Russia, Austria, Poland, and Venice signed the peace treaty of Karlowitz with the Sublime Porte in 1699. Later, the Treaty of Passarowitz in 1718 strengthened the political power of the Habsburg Empire in Central and Eastern Europe. Now, Ottomans understood that it is not the greatest empire of the world, but one of the others. This is a very important reality. And they faced this reality in the end of the 17th century and beginning of the 18th century. This radically changed Ottoman stance. This radically changed Ottoman approach to the world. And global politics reshaped in the 18th century after this realities of the 17th century. A series of defeats and disadvantages, peace treaties for the empire followed. The political conjuncture in Europe granted a rather gradual Turkish retreat from Eastern Europe, which lasted almost 2 centuries. The 18th century is the period when economic dominance of Western Europe was felt in the intercontinental trading activity of the Ottoman Empire. This stagnation not only emerged from defeats on the war fields, but also from the fact that now economy is deteriorating. How? European industrialization, specifically after the 18th century, but its signs began in the 17th century England. European industrialization gradually captured markets in the Middle East. Ottoman industrial productions concentrated on handicrafts and raw material manufacture, which were technologically inferior to the goods imported from abroad. Hence, European goods invaded local bazaars throughout the Ottoman Empire. Woolen fabrics were the principal imported items rather than woolen fabrics, yani manufactured wool, and the fabrics obtained from this process remained almost only processed exportation mean, and this was a great threat to the Ottoman presence in the Balkans. Since if you don't support your realm with economy, a great economical background, this at the end will result in stagnation and retreat. In the Ottoman East, France was the most admired Western nation at that time, and Versailles was a cultural model for other monarchies. In the 15th and 16th centuries, Italy, southern France and Italy was the model. In the 17th century, It is now France. Even in the following 18th century, France is the model in the world. Diplomatic matters. It was the lingua, French was the lingua franca. Diplomatic matters conducted with this language. Not only language, but etiquette, işte style, manners altogether. Not imposed, but in a way influenced from the French palace in Paris. And then in the 19th century, this is to be changed by the British. British will replace French in the 19th century up to the 1940s. Now, in the second half of the 20th century, it is America. Became a model. Then there is a potential for the others in the future. Anyway, mirror halls, silver furniture, ironworks, gold and silver items were emblems of hereditary absolutist monarchy. Now, ascendancy of West in markets of the Middle East did not only cause or reshaped matters in the sphere of economics, but also this greatly reshaped material culture. How? Now you import from Western Europe, processed materials, yani processed materials, yani goods. You import them. And among them are clocks, for example, sight clocks. Yani clock is an instrument now, technologically more advanced, in comparison to the local ones. Or ironworks, grilled ironworks also. As it is indicated here, silver furniture, mirror, gold and silver items, they were also imported from West. They penetrated to Eastern markets, not only as utensil for daily use, but their ornamentations, the way their shapes, ornamentational details or design details, greatly influenced now the way local manufacturers of arts and crafts and architecture produced. Rococo and Baroque influence then started by means of the spread of manufactured goods. This makes the case more concrete to understand. If I would say to you that, okay, there are interactions, encounters, influences, then Baroque arrived. You would ask, Hocam, isn't there a more concrete, more definite, reason why this style spreads in the Eastern world? I mean, this is the most definite, most concrete I have found explanation. This is not my idea. It was introduced by Ayda Arel, a professor, specialist of this century, who indicated in one of his studies that these goods, these processed goods, created admiration because they were more useful now, easy to operate. And this admiration, in a way, also covered admiration for the ornamental details on them, which were initially Baroque, then in the second half of the 18th century, Rococo. Baroque and Rococo then penetrated to the Ottoman world by means of trade relations, mostly. Trade relations reshaped the cultures of the Ottoman world. At that time, Ottoman world signified the entire Mediterranean basin, including Balkans, Anatolia, Syria, Iraq, North Africa. Then when we say Ottoman or Turkish, this means that Middle East in its entirety. Because political power was dependent on economic power, the delegates of trade companies, they named bailo or residents, just get rid of this, acquired a great deal of power and indeed became the official representatives of their countries. Who were these people? They are named Levantines. Levantines. It's a French word. Levant means east, and Levant is east, or the land's sun comes. Levant, yani Levantine, are the people who were the representatives of Western companies who were sent by the Western centers of trade, diplomacy as agents. They resided in great towns like Alexandria, Smyrna, Constantinopolis, even Trabzon, yeah, and even Kastamonu. Kastamonu, if you go to Kastamonu, you would see this great buildings from the 19th century. And their activities accelerated, of course, in 19th century, and the urban districts rebuilt in the 19th century. Pera bağları işte. Pera bağları. Entirely changed. There were orchards in Pera, in Istanbul, on the hills of Galata. Pera bağları, or Pera orchards, entirely changed. And now Beyoğlu, by the Turks, Pera, by the Levantines, became a great colony center where Greek, Jewish, Armenian minorities and Levantines of French and Italian and British origin lived. Altogether, local minorities, Armenian, Greek, and Jewish people also joined this group of residents, since they were Christian mostly, or Jewish, with similar roots of Western European representatives, and they could more easily communicate with the languages they learned in school, since Western countries encouraged, Western languages to be learned to the children of the minority groups. And this group became embedded with the Levantines and a new society, now in formation. This started in the 18th century, but accelerated in 19th century. When you go to our towns, like Istanbul, Kastamonu, Trabzon, Izmir, Antakya today, Antalya even, the Kaleiçi, altogether, you would see great mansions. Even in Kayseri, there was this Ottoman neighborhood, totally destroyed, unfortunately. But in Istanbul, Trabzon, you can see those monuments, these great buildings from 19th century, which were commissioned by these residents. Among them, as I told you, were members of the local minority group. Why I am underlining this so long? Because these people, together with Turkish magnates, Turkish Muslim, how can I say, rich, wealthy, and powerful, altogether encouraged Baroque and Rococo in the 18th century onwards. This is the reason we need to understand these social changes, how new groups emerged after the 18th century. These new groups, upper class, mostly, upper middle or upper class groups, encouraged Baroque and Rococo. One might say Western European style in arts and architecture. Baba Ali, yani Ottoman government, acknowledged their new status and started to negotiate diplomatic, political, commercial, and even religious issues with them, with the bailo and residents. Thus, the Ottoman state entered into a new age of lively relationships with Western European capitals and their representatives in the East. With the emergence of the wealthy Ayan, a group named Ayan. Ayan existed in the 16th century, but their roles changed. Ayan are the people who were powerful in their local domain. Yani işte forerunners of the village, town, or even small cities, named Ayan. They were representatives of the community. They were also intermediaries between Ottoman capital and the people, a group of wealthy people. These could be retired janissaries, yani emekli asker de olabilir bunlar. Retired janissaries who had an impact upon society, who gained new roles, governmental roles, since collapsing Ottoman Empire gradually lost its control over the provinces, and now Ayan became more powerful, more and more powerful. In this class, in this group of people, were also well-paid bureaucrats, and traditional society began to dissolve. But maybe we cannot say that a new bourgeois class appeared in the Ottoman world. Local Turkish bourgeois class appeared in the Ottoman world after the 18th century. We cannot say this. No local Turkish bourgeois class. But now we have a class of people, not typically bourgeois, because in the Ottoman, on the European bourgeoisie, these people are traders, industrialists, colonialists altogether. But in the Ottoman world, these were not as such. These were local landowners, tax collectors, retired soldiers, and kind of people. And these people, mostly, in direct relationship with agricultural activities and also tax collecting or governmental paid bureaucrats among them altogether, compose now a group in towns. And this group actually led, one might say, westernization, led kind of transformations that occurred in societies, in Turkish Muslim society. Let aside, the Levantines and minority groups. You might find people or groups closer to this definition of bourgeoisie, the European definition of bourgeoisie, since members of these groups occupied themselves with trade, mostly with trade. Then among the minority groups and Levantines, there is a bourgeoisie class, bourgeoisie formation, but not in the Turkish Muslim groups. The bourgeoisie formation among Turkish Muslim groups started in the 20th century. In the 20th century, after the reforms introduced in the Republican age, but still this bourgeoisie is questionable. If you take a European model, and compare with that, it shouldn't be necessarily a typical bourgeoisie we find in 19th century Europe. This is a local formation. What I mean is that a group of people occupied, in business matters, in trades, and high bureaucrats altogether composed in the 20th century this kind of bourgeoisie. But before their numbers were very restricted, and Ayan represented them, and cannot be regarded as a group of bourgeoisie, but as a class in close relationship with the governance, with the polis, and were in the role of intermediary mediators between people and the polis. Local lords controlled huge agricultural estates. These estates, called çiftlik, demonstrated the most intense trading activity with Western markets. Elite families in the cities and the Ayan in the provinces spent a lot of money on the construction of mansions, kasır and konak, waterside houses, yalı, and charity endowments in Baroque style. Halil Nalcik holds that it was in the 18th century for the first time that the West began to be looked on as a source of admiration and appreciation, and Western culture as a whole took the form of a prestige culture for the elite. Now, instead of Farsi, yani Persian and Arabic, models. Now gradually Western European models in arts and letters and architecture become more and more appreciated. This is a reality of 18th and 19th centuries due to this changing socio-political climate. İşte Enayan, Tepedelenli Ali Paşa from 18th century, a painting by a Greek painter. Another Ayan, Hasan Çavuşoğlu, sitting on his sedir, you see. And Choiseul Gouffier, French ambassador, visiting his house. This is a I suppose it is a little, what was the name of this? Anyway, the black and white lithograph painting, I suppose. It's a book created by Choiseul Gouffier. It's about his visits to Western Anatolian, yani Aegean towns and cities, and he met many people there. Hasan Çavuşoğlu was the local Ayan in Aydın. You can see on the ceiling of his house some designs of Western features. I mean, probably Rococo, not easily definable, but kind of Rococo on the ceiling. Until the middle of the 19th century, manners and dress did not much change in the Ottoman world. Turkish Muslim members of the society continued their traditional dress and manners. You can see how he sits cross-legged on the sedir and his friends and others, while the French ambassador with his 18th century typical costume, sitting, with his legs down, European way. This never changed, though we have Baroque and Rococo features penetrating to all art and architecture. This is a greater. Bunu ben yeni koymuştum, unutmuşum orada. House of diye kalmış. But it's a nice picture. It is nice to see it greater. Evet. Political agreements with Western governments no longer contain statements. Okay, it is 10:30, by the way. 10:30, and we are all tired. Let's have a break for 10 minutes and meet at 20 to 11. Bye-bye. The 19th century, even beginning of 20th century shop in Istanbul, an Ottoman shop in Istanbul. This is the capital city, but the shop, as you can see, looks like a shop in a town, in a village even. The way this products produced displays as a very local, even vernacular atelier level, as you can see. But when you compare it with an 18th century print, I don't want to actually say that Ottoman productions were in every field like this. I mean, we have a well-advanced weaponry, for example, didn't we? Weaponry. But this lasted until the 17th century. After the 18th century, we have reform attempts introduced in military and also military education, but this did not extend to the different realms of the Ottoman society where knowledge needed, new knowledge in different fields needed. A good case is the print shops in Europe in the 18th century. I mean, how they became advanced in the 18th century. Age of Enlightenment. I mean, Ottoman system mostly collapsed due to the industrial developments in Western Europe. And in the background of this, of course, is knowledge production, libraries, print shops, and so forth. Now in the 18th century, we also find new libraries opened in Istanbul, great libraries like Atif Efendi Library and many others. But unfortunately, the topics covered in these libraries were mostly of humanities. Not unfortunately, they are also very useful, but in terms of the European advancements in technology and science, this non-existence of knowledge production in science and technology caused great drawbacks. And one of the result is this kind of a shop in the beginning of the 20th century, where goods produced still in a very traditional way. Okay, go back to the 18th century Ayan topic. Here we have bunu da unutmuşum silmeyi neyse. The same slides. Bunu okuduk mu? Evet. Political agreements with Western governments no longer contained now statements stressing the supremacy and vaingloriousness of the Sultan. For example, in the 16th century, no European ruler was named king or emperor. The only emperor was Ottoman Sultan. But now this totally changed. Bernard Lewis remarked that the Ottomans became aware of the fact that they were no longer the empire of Islam confronting Christendom, but one state among several, among whom there might be allies as well as enemies. Now, the equal status of the Ottoman state with the others in Europe became recognized by the powers. The waning hostility of the Westerners towards the Turks and a new Turkish approach to Europeans opened avenues for dialogue. This is a very interesting case now in 18th century continental culture. I mean European. Now, Europeans understood that Ottoman Empire is not as powerful as before, and it is not anymore a threat to West. This introduced a waning hostility towards the Turks. The traces of it still exists, but it's not as great as before now in the 18th century. And the result of this was the strengthening of diplomatic relations. Now more diplomatic envoys sent to Ottoman lands, more travelers, intellectuals sent. They collected information, published books about the Ottoman East. I mean, already Orientalism emerged in this century, altogether with this knowledge. Of course, this knowledge is not genuine. It's a processed knowledge, but still a knowledge there about the Ottoman lands. Westerners also started to understand that Ottoman culture and Ottoman society and state, I mean, had also merits, together with with the drawbacks, threatening the West, but also merits, some points to be admired. And also there was a kind of mutual understanding, now the emergence of a mutual understanding of each other. Ottomans understood that West is not as unimportant as before, and Western Europeans understood that Ottomans are not as barbarians as they pictured before. Now this opened new gates of dialogue, and travelers, diplomatic missions exchanged, and it introduced awareness of each other. Awareness of each other. This is the beginning of Orientalism and beginning of Occidentalism we find in these different spheres. Occidentalism, yani, it is a correspondent of, of Orientalism, knowledge on the West and manners and styles in Western manners and styles in the Eastern lands. This is Occidentalism. The accounts of the French travelers highly contributed to this development. The first historically recorded initiative of this new mutual interest was the travels of a former janissary and late official, 28 Çelebi Mehmet Efendi, who was sent with a mission now, rather than a spy or just a representative of the state. Now he was sent with a mission to France. This mission was to establish better diplomatic relations with France and also collect information about Western developments in technology. Since after his return to Istanbul, almost 1 year after, he traveled in France, he introduced a sefaretname, yani embassy letter, a report which was published. Its manuscripts spread, but also published in 20th century. In this embassy letter, he informs his readers about recent developments in France, its new technology, together with architecture, urban milieus, the enhancing cities of France, together with urban planning, which was greatly admired by 28 Çelebi Mehmet Efendi. Corresponding to this is the travelers who visited Eastern lands in the 18th century, Western travelers, French travelers, English, British travelers, who collected information and published books. Orientalist painting, yes, okay, it's a feature of 19th century, but its precursors are those illuminations in books, are those pictures in books, printed, of course, informing about the lands of the East, lands of the Ottoman world. And this created an image of Ottomans, an image of the Turks, which was not as negative as before, and even as negative as after. 20th century negative, I don't know why, but this became shaped, reshaped. 20th century negative image of the Turks did not exist in the 18th century world. I mean, Turks were respected because of their high culture, because of their great military compound, because of their history. In the 18th century, admiration was mutual. But only at the end of the 18th century did the Ottoman elite recognize the importance of having information on European lands and civilization. Then, or Occidentalism greatly shaped in the end of the 19th century, not maybe in the 18th century, but or Occidentalism also started in the 18th century, we can say so. Even at that time, owing to the traditional Islamic perspective, the masses refused to accept ideas of reform if they were introduced from above, and particularly if they had implications on their lifestyle. If you regard, I mean, there is no need to look for, reforms or, I don't know, radical change in society. I mean, this shouldn't necessarily be happen. I mean, the change was gradual. It was a transformation. It was a process that lasted long. I mean, and masses also joined this in time. Initially, Ayan, bureaucrats, the Levantines, minority groups, all together with the understanding of this political and economic change, entered a period of transformation in their culture. They may be more open-heartedly accepted change. Masses closed themselves. The change of the masses lasted long. Even today, this go on. I mean, for example, in the 19th century, ordinary Muslim was like an earlier 8th, 17th century, 16th century Muslim in his or her daily culture, daily life. Sorry. This is Çelebi Mehmet Efendi. He visited France in 1721, and he left a mark upon French society because for the first time an intellectual, another one intellectual, a wise man, because he was so, he could speak many languages and he could communicate in French, I suppose so. I'm not sure, I should check this. And he credits a halo of positive nature around himself. He met with French nobles, even met with ordinary French. He visited French and urban environments, palaces, villages, because he traveled from south of France, from Marseille to Paris via sea routes, Canal du Midi, the river, up to d'Orléans. From d'Orléans he took chart, ne deniyor ona? At arabalı yani. Chart işte. He took chart and visited different places, palaces and so forth, and reached to Paris. He also visited different places in Paris, even an observatory there, Rasathane. And he recorded his experiences on paper. After he returned, he presented this to the palace. And he really left a great mark upon French society. And on his return, his embassy letter also credited a similar impact upon Ottoman nobles. And paintings like this credits about his visit of the Tuileries Palace, Tuileries Gardens, sorry, Tuileries Palace. This is Çelebi. Here he is on horseback. Sorry, here it is on horseback in a parade in the Tuileries Gardens. At that time in Paris, palaces like Marly, I showed you this before, existed. Çelebi visited Marly Palace, and he informs us about Marly Palace, how this great access is credited by pools, by trees all along. This did not exist at that time in the Ottoman capital. I mean, trees on the two sides of a pathway or a pool, in a boulevard, lining the central road altogether. This is a feature he encountered in France and introduced in his embassy letter. Later, in 1723, a palace commissioned by Sultan Ahmed III contained orange trees planted along a riverbed, you see. In a similar way, these trees planted along this artificial pool. Then the natural Sadabad, Kağıthane River in Sadabad, evaluated here like a Baroque axis with trees planted. Can we relate this to the narrative of Çelebi Mehmet Efendi? We can, but we don't know really how this could be possible. It is another question that shortly after an embassy letter presented to the palace, Ahmed III ordering a palace named Sadabat at Kağıthane, having the river like a baroque axis organized, with cascades, şelale, cascades, water jets, fountains all together in a way reminding this idea of a central system of pools, axial, and buildings on the two sides, and so forth. This is a general atmosphere of cross-cultural relations now started. Maybe Çelebi himself is a product of this, or his visits is a product of this atmosphere that started in the beginning of the 18th century. If this background wouldn't exist, nobody would send Çelebi to Paris, go there, and now introduce a new age of diplomatic relations. Really, he initiated this. And his son, Said Efendi, later opened the first print house in Istanbul. Ibrahim Müteferrika was the technician, but the money was provided by Said Pasha, his son. Anyway, what we have here then, the product of a new atmosphere, cultural atmosphere, Sadabat, and 28 Mehmet Efendi's visits also is a product of this new age. We cannot say that Çelebi's visits influenced then construction of Sadabat Pass. This is my personal conviction. Anyway, look at these ladies. This is a book named Hubanname, yani the Book of Ladies, by an Ottoman artist from the end of the 18th century. At that time, Sadabat was still operating and he could visit it, the site at least, not maybe the harem section and the gardens, but the site was known. Neydi adı ya? Enderunlu Fazıl. Enderunlu Fazıl is the artist. Look at these ladies of the harem so freely entertaining themselves in the gardens. This is a new trend. This is a new trend with European repercussions. European influence, let me say as such. Having good times in open air. This habit existed. Mesireye çıkmak, yani mesire yeri, mesire ziyareti, mesireye çıkmak. This habit existed in the Ottoman culture. But now the ladies joined it. More and more ladies joined. And the depiction of these ladies as such, with their beauties open, is a new trend, really. This happened. Now, liberation of women, I don't want to use liberation, but how can I say? Participation of women in the non-private worlds, in public domain, gradually started after the 18th century. This is a new development. Also, public space redefined in the 18th century. Tulay Artan, one of our graduates, now at Sabancı University professor, wrote a paper on this. In Turkish, but you can find it on the internet in Metis, published in Metis Journal. Neydi onun adı? Belki hatırlarsınız. Benim asistanlarımız. Private.
Ben hatırlayamadım.
Ya private'ın Osmancası neydi ya? İngilizce konuşuyor, Türkçe unutuyorum.
Bakalım hocam.
Özel alan yani. Şeyin resmi. Private yani gizli, kapalı. Onu sadece söylerseniz hatırlarım. Private.
Mahrem olabilir mi hocam?
Ha?
Mahrem.
Mahrem. Mahremin resmi miydi? Neydi ki şeyin adı? Makalenin adı. Çok güzel makaledir. Onu tavsiye ederim size. Bu dönüşümü anlatıyor. This is the first paper, maybe one of the rare papers on this transformation of the private and its participation in the public sphere. Mahrumiyetin Resmi, değil mi? Mahrumiyetin Resmi is the name of the paper. The face of the private English. Cetveli Sim is the name of this axis, the silver line. Silver line, bakın. Even a name is given to this Baroque axis. Hasbahçe, Hasoda dairesi. This is the men's section. Harem-i Şerif, this is the ladies section overlooking the river. This is the ladies section, Harem-i Şerif. This is the men's section, as you can see at the background. Hasoda dairesi, the sultan's room. And we have Çağlayan-ı Sali, cascades, water jets, Çeşme-i Nur Nev Beyda. When you look at these names, they are mostly Persian. This displays us also admiration of still Oriental civilization, Persian, since in the East now Safavid kingdom, past its 17th century glory, but still the memories are there. Then we have here typical Istanbul, yani typical Anatolia, impacts from East and West intermingling, creating a hybrid culture and architecture. Here we have a Baroque axis, kind of trees planted in a line, like the ones you would find in Paris at that time on the boulevards, and names given to different parts from Persian. How Ottoman palace, in a way, integrating royal images from different parts of the world and creating its own cosmopolitan culture. Still then, Ottoman capital had this power, had this capability to integrate, to reshape, to synthesize, instead of imitating, aping. Still the Ottoman world is powerful to integrate, to take and make its own. This we find all throughout the 18th century. Maybe in the second half of the 18th century, Rococo will gradually invade, but up to the middle of the 18th century, Ottomans struggled to integrate, to synthesize even Western elements presented to them. This is a nice original drawing from a book by Doston, Muratja Doston, who was an Armenian origin diplomat. Credit this book. Sadamat Palace is presented in it, with the Baroque axis and the palace. Look at the Mesire Yeri, how people thoroughly employ these gardens, sportive activities, cirit oyunları, javelin they say in English, javelin games. Ladies together with men, of course, with a distance between, occupy or in a way entertain themselves in open air. Then we can say this not only with this example, with many others like the yalis on the Bosphorus. Ottoman palace opening itself to the outside world, opening of the palace to the outside world. Now, foundation of yalis on the Bosphorus, even palaces on the Bosphorus, on the Golden Horn, Haliç yani, signals the beginning of a new age. Now, Ottoman palace would like to break its walls, Topkapı walls, and join the other part of the city. What is this other part of the city? Pera, Galata. Now we find yalis built on the Bosphorus as part of this other. And Sadamat Palace on the Bosphorus, since residents of Galata and Pera, who were mostly Levantines and minority groups, might easily access to this part of the city, to the Bosphorus and to the Golden Horn, and join the royal groups frequenting these parts of the city. This trend still is in Istanbul. When you would like to see European side of Istanbul, where would you go? Değil mi? Beyoğlu, Taksim, işte neresi orası? Şu yeni apartmanlar, Maslak, değil mi? İşte İstinye Park, işte Bosphorus. You would like to go to this part of the city when you would like to see westernized, European, global Istanbul, değil mi? Not to Fatih, yani Edirne Kapısı, or I don't know, işte the parts which signify old Istanbul, Ottoman, Turkish, Islamic Istanbul. Still this image is there in Istanbul. Still, işte İstanbul neydi o? İstanbul Modern miydi adı onun? Müzenin.
İstanbul Modern var hocam, evet.
İstanbul Modern mesela, değil mi? Exhibition centers, movie theaters, all together are in this part, still there. And this Sadabat on the Golden Horn at Kağıthane was on this part. And Yalız on the Bosphorus, I will be showing to you them, on this part. Yani this trend started in the 18th century. You know, opening of the palace to the other side, joining to the other side, this idea. And şimdi size bir şey göstereceğim bunları. Ay, o yok mu? Demin diğer slaytlara bakıyordum. Onu ben size göstermeliyim ama şimdi tam yeri geldi. Onu ben size bir dakika. Just a minute please. I would like to show you this by means of another slide. I should make this. Aç diyorum. Bir başka derste anlattığım bir konu bu. Evet. Oradaki bir slaytı göstermek istiyorum size. Buraya aktarmamışım onu ne yazık ki. O other side nedir? Onu görmenizi istiyorum. Evet. Sadabat'ta hemen sonra koyayım. Ama seneyi de hatırlamıyorum. Sonra niye bunu koydum diye, bu slide niye burada diye. Kendi kendime sorup duruyorum. Evet, share screen. Bakın şimdi. Görebiliyor musunuz arkadaşlar? Orçun görülebiliyor mu?
Görünüyor hocam.
Bakın şimdi. Bu other side neresi? This is a nice print from Joseph Gouffiers' book again, from the end of the 18th century. This is a depiction of Istanbul from European side. French Consulate Gardens. This French Consulate still is there. Nuri Ziya Sokak, Oda Kule. This is the Beyoğlu. And French Consulate Building is still there. Ana hatta şey diyorlar, Fransız evi mi, sarayı mı bir şey diyorlar. Fransız sarayı diyorlar hala. This is the Consulate Building in Istanbul. At that time it was Ambassador's Building, of course. Not today, it is the Consulate Building. In the gardens, you would see ladies in French costume, French costume based on Spanish, 16th century Spanish dress. But now, let me say that this is French costume dress worn by ladies and men in the gardens, entertaining themselves, looking at the city. At the background, you see, you know, işte, mosques, Topkapı Palace. On the left, we have Tophane, Canon Manufactory, neydi onu? Tophane binası, yani Cannon House, let me say, Kılıç Ali Paşa Camisi, Cihangir Camisi. Cihangir is a late work, something else here it is. This is more of a arbor town, and it is more of Ottoman, and Ottoman, but a bit Ottoman, I mean Turkish Islamic, and the Turkish Islamic city over there. These ladies looking at the city have a vision. This vision, starts from the spot where they are in. They are in the French gardens. French style mansion, French dress, French gardening. But they look at a Ottoman Turkish city, değil mi? Turkish city. Typical 16th century Ottoman, formed in this age. And let's change our spot, go to the Topkapı Palace and look from Topkapı Palace to Pera. What you see, you look to this side, which is really a European, French ambassadors, Dutch ambassadors' house. İşte, you know, it's a prospering city now. More and more mansions, European style, becoming built on the hill of hills or gardens or orchards, they say, pera bağları yani. You see a European side, European manners, ways, or whatever going on the other side of the city. The other is there, which is Western European, not European, because Europe partly belongs to Ottomans at that time. It is Western Europe, France, değil mi? England, Holland, these are the major powers, Spain. This part is represented by Pera across Turkish Islamic section. This part became shaped after 18th century. Pera bağları. Pera, later to be named Beyoğlu. And Ottoman royalty, inspecting it from afar, gradually developed, of course, inclinations, predilections, to be a part of it. To be a part of this global changing world, and Istanbul is a signal of it. It's almost a symbol of it. And construction of Sadabat in the Golden Horn, or yalıs and even palaces on the Bosphorus, are the attempts to be not maybe a part of, but to be in relation with this Western European side of Istanbul. Now, other is becoming to be rendered a part of the Ottoman society. This other is Western Europe, not Christian, not Jewish, anything else, but Western Europe. This Western Europe included at that time an Enlightenment culture, değil mi? More industrial society, changing manners and ways of dress and so forth. Peki, şimdi geri gidelim. Here we have the cascades and the river. One of these cascades can be shown here with even these trees were given to Sultan Ahmet III by Dutch ambassador. Dutch ambassador presented those orange trees as a gift to this palace. Very interesting. Okay. This Üsküdar Valide Camisi is one of the earliest 18th century building complexes. A 19th century photograph shows very well how the street in relation to the complex now had been defined in a different way. One of the most visible signs of whatever different way this is, the Sebil. Sebil is now at the corner of the walls separating the city from the mosque, at the corner, as if it is welcoming passerbys on the right and left. This tomb is entirely open with grills. It is an open tomb, as you can see. This fountain and the gates, the stair scales, and the Sebil altogether displays us an inclination to relate those sections in a more meaningful way, instead of just attaching a Sebil on the wall or creating a great portal without any relation to the environment. This is the beginning. This is the beginning. Earliest disposition of the new trends. This was the mosque founded by the mother of Ahmet III, Valide Mosque, Gülniş Sultan. And the architecture also changed, architecture of the mosque. Now there's separation of the parts reintroduced. This is a retreat to pre-Sinan period. Fragmentation reintroduced. I mean, you see these proportions changed, so much changed that this dome with the drum, this wall of the prayer space, altogether are not parts of an integrated pyramidal developments. I mean, they are like early Ottoman buildings, separately dealt with, as if the, how can I say, the canons created by Sinan are gradually to be forgotten. I don't know why. Is it because it was just Sinan's design understanding and forgotten? Or I don't know, maybe Sinan's structural systems necessitated more advanced, can I say, understanding of relationships. I don't know, really, or it was more difficult to make it, or now it is local Christians gaining more and more roles in design without losing their backgrounds, because mosques now turn out to be church-like buildings in the 18th century. Not typically, but influence from this realm, early Ottoman and Byzantine, now re-emerge. This is not a kind of now architectural scenery where genius of a single architect controls. It is a more independent realm where local traditions re-emerge in a period of decline. And one of them is Byzantine, of course. Şehzadebaşı Damat İbrahim Pasha, in a similar way, introduces us with a corner sebile at fountain in relation to it. This white eave in relation to the eave of the fountain introduce us a continuum, and the opened wall of the külliye grills almost eliminate this separation of outside and inside. You can have the view of the interior. There's a symmetry inside, and you can pray from the outside, not without entering the gardens. These are all new trends. Damat İbrahim Pasha Darna, this 19th century, a drawing from 19th century, and we find people now use outside space, and how they, in this kind of drawings, you can see how they are in a relationship with the sebile, with the fountain, with the outside world. I mean, now on the fringes of the külliyes, not inside the külliye, but outside the külliye. And this opening of the building to the street is in parallel to this. Now passerby enjoy themselves with those nice Baroque decorations on the walls, on the sebiles, and sebiles welcome them. Sebiles go to the street. The building now goes to the goes to the street, becoming a part of the street, inviting people to itself by means of the facades. It's an architecture of facades then. It's an architecture of facades now directly on the street instead of behind the walls, but on the streets. This is a Baroque trend, really a Baroque trend. Invitation to the building. Here you can see in this 19th century photograph, a barber, you see, even doing his job next to this fountain because water is there and very useful. And people sitting on chairs in a traditional manner, some leaning over the sebile. And at the back is the Direkler Arası. Once upon a time, this part of the city was the center of entertainment, and Direkler Arası was the place where meddah oyunları, meddah plays took place. And fountains that once upon a time existed only as structures attached to walls at the sides of crossroads now become more independent structures, great independent almost buildings with four sides, defining an urban piece, even creating an urban square, as you can see. 1728 is the date when this Sultanahmet fountain, commissioned by Ahmet III. And it is the first fountain where we have Rococo employed, as you can see. This facade is entirely Rococo also. The other sides display us some traditional Seljuk, Ottoman, Rumi, and palmettes. We understand that designer, probably after Sultan asked, introduced Rococo ornamentation on this facade, which was directly visible by the Sultan passing to reach to Ayasofya Camisi. This is the site Sultan would see. Rococo is preferred there. And we understand that Sultan now encouraged artists to introduce Rococo designs on the Ottoman architecture. At the back is the Dar el Fünun, 19th century, and a house of sciences. Fünun, Fen'in çoğulu, Fen, Fünun. Fen, science, Fünun, sciences. House of Sciences means it is a building dedicated to science. Yani the first university founded here, later, unfortunately, fired. Darül Fünun was here. And our first university was this building in Turkey, 19th century, middle of the 19th century. And a recent photograph shows us this building has no significance today because Topkapı Palace is not anymore used. It's a touristic site. Nobody strolls around this site except tour guides and tourists. Then it is not anymore a part of a great lively urban center, but just a touristic object, unfortunately. Water became prominent in Istanbul by means of these fountains and sebils. One of the scholars of Ottoman architecture, Godfrey Goodwin, once expressed the points he made that water was also important in Baroque Rome, 17th century, and pools everywhere in Rome demonstrate this. The water elements integrated in urban milieus is a feature of Baroque Rome. And the use of water in this way, in a totally different way in the Ottoman world, of course, could be a parallel to this development. Why not? It is possibly so. But we don't have great pools like the ones in Rome, in Istanbul, just sebils like this. When you look at the architecture of the Sebil, it is closer to India rather than to değil mi? France. Remember Taj Mahal with its dome and domes, even smaller ones at the corner. This is the Mughal architecture we find in India. Probably an impact reached from east again to west, and this formation of Sultanahmet Fountain has an air from Mughal architecture, Indian architecture. The cross-cultural and global trends then not only has a European character now, but also here in Istanbul, but also Eastern, Islamic. Oh, one of the earliest photographs in the world, Robertson, 1850s. Look at these men having water from the Sebil and others sitting around. This is a group of Saka men, as I told you, who carried water from fountain to the houses. Sakas also helped people to extinguish fire. In times of fires occurred in the city, the Saka people carried water in order to prevent fire spread. Saka'yı hatırlar mısınız? Maybe you can remember this word from another lecture I presented to you. There was a term, Asakia. Do you remember? Asakia. Acequia in Spanish. Neydi Asakia? Water channel. Water transportation system. Alhambra Palace. Asakia. And Saka. Is there any Arabic-speaking student here? I'm sure there are. Maybe they can tell me something about these words in Arabic, because these are Arabic words. For example, do you use saka? In Turkish, this saka is water carrier, somebody who transports water. Asakya is surely Arabic, yani Asakya. But whatever Saka, it could be an Ottoman invention. I don't know really whether it is used in Arabic or not. Saka. Anyway, here we have Saka people around. This is fountain next to the Kapı Palace, Babi Humayun. And these are the Turkish Islamic background decorative motifs on the sides. Even the way they are introduced here in this composition gives us a feature of Rococo mood. Rococo compositions were extending curls like this. Actually, Rococo is based upon Islamic decoration, Chinese and Islamic, Oriental. Rococo is based on Chinese and Islamic abstract patterns. Rococo is a decorative style. Rococo is not an architectural style. Rococo is a decorative style, appeared in the palaces of Paris, Trianon, Versailles, introduced by French decorators in 1770s and so. This Rococo transferred to Istanbul. Bakın, almost 10 years later, 1728, on this monument, we have a decorative composition with features from earlier Seljuk, Palmet, and Rumi motifs. But the way these are brought together give us a mood, an order, a composition derived from Rococo designs. This is quite interesting. And the facade overlooking Hagia Sophia, yani western facade, this is northern facade, Turkish, but with Rococo mood. On the western facade, this is the facade on looking west, which could be seen by the Sultan. We have entirely Rococo decorative composition, Rococo bakın. And on the eaves, we have Rococo. How these two would exist side by side, yani traditional Turkish in Rococo mood and totally Rococo. This hybridity is a feature of 18th century. In some points, this hybridity is eliminated and integration, as it is here, obtained. But this side-by-side living is a sign of hybridity, right? It's very interesting, yani. Then we understand that Ottoman art is struggling to integrate, the new elements, art elements coming from somewhere. He is influenced by them in his mind. He would like to introduce his traditional motifs, composition elements even in some cases, and creating something new, original, even with them. This lasted until the middle of the 18th century. And the new style, neydi? Ben Türkçe unuttum yani. Konuşamıyorum. Saat 35 olmuş. Çok uzattım. Yeni üslup diyorlar buna. Osmanlıcasını hatırlayamadım. I couldn't remember the Ottoman. Nev icat. Nev icat they say in Ottoman. Yani nev Farsi yani Persian means new. Nev icat. Nev icat yeni yani new inventions. This is the name given in the 18th century to the new style introduced. Again, back to the Mihrjab Türbe, how it is rendered a part of the street can be seen with this photograph from 19th century. It is entirely Rococo now, the decorative motifs. It's from the second half of the 18th century, and Rococo invaded. Rococo invaded as a decorative style. Cornice is Baroque. As I told you, Rococo is an ornamental style, while Baroque is both ornamental and architectural. Baroque forms, oval, undulating, convoluting forms, altogether are Baroque features of architecture. Inside of the room of Sultan Ahmed, we have this sort of walls compartmentalized by gilded lines as such, very similar to a Baroque interior from 17th century. We have then a perspective, a kind of false perspective created by means of decorative styles, mirrors used in Baroque palaces in order to obtain impacts similar to this. Here we have a mirror, another one over there. This is a very small, tiny room. Mirror and compartmentalization on the walls introduced in order to aggrandize it, to enlarge it. Even there is a mirror in the ceiling, which introduces us the image of a greater room. Natural plants and fruits in vases is a typical feature of 18th century Ottoman ornamentations. Later, this room for Mihri Shah Sultan, Topkapı Palace, doesn't include any Ottoman traditional classical thing, neither compositional nor decorative figure motifs from classical age. All here is Western European, mostly French Rococo. French Rococo. These roundel, these seashells, as you can see, and these cartouche altogether are all Rococo elements. It's a fireplace here at the center. And in this room, you also see paintings, Western style paintings for the first time applied in Topkapı Palace. Or Western style painting, art of painting, appeared for the first time in Topkapı Palace as mural painting. Mural yani M-U-R-A-L. Duvar resimleri, wall paintings or mural paintings. In these paintings, we have mostly these gardens or palaces. In this garden, we have a perspective focusing up on islands in the background. As you can see, this perspective is Renaissance perspective employed here. And introduction of architecture as a piece of this false perspective is a trend in Renaissance painting. Use of architectural elements and false perspective actually are features we find in 18th century mural painting as an insignia of the beginning of art of Western style painting in Turkey. From here, this style spread to the mansions of the rich, to Anatolia, to the mansions of the provincial leaders. All over Anatolia, if you travel from one city to other, if you visit a konak, a kiosk, you would see mural paintings. Even in some, you would see Istanbul landscapes. In this, we see European landscapes. I mean, in order to introduce whatever admired in whatever locality. Anyway, here we have 20 to 12. Let's have a break of 10 minutes. We can come together at 10 to 12. Bye-bye, see you. By Melling, a French architect who was hired by Sultan Selim III to be his designer. Actually, he is the first Western architect or non-Muslim architect to be hired by the Sultan. He created this, is not the work of Melling. We don't know who created this interior, by the way. Melling, after he left Istanbul, published an album on the virtues of Bosphorus, having drawings of the mansions on the Bosphorus and also his own designs. This map is from this book by Melling, giving us main quarters on the Bosphorus and Princess Islands of Istanbul, historical peninsula, and Golden Horn. It's a nice map, really. It reads Canal de Constantinople. Bosphorus yani işte. Hatice Sultan commissioned a palace for herself. So Hatice Sultan is the sister of Selim III. You see how ladies, women members of the palace are now having visible roles. She ordered a palace to be built for himself and for her husband, of course. And Melling designed this. Melling stayed in Istanbul for a while with his wife. And this house probably is their house. He stayed here with his wife. This house is in totally Renaissance style with its pediment and the front. This loggia, this bay window carried by columns, typical of this sort of buildings, having the view of the sea. Hatice Sultan is shown in her boat, traveling from her palace to somewhere, we don't know. Hatice Sultan's palace is in traditional, how can I say, style. It contains bay windows overlooking Bosphorus, but these garden facades with flowers in vases presents us a Renaissance style. Inside the palace, on the ceilings, we have Rococo decorative compositions together with Renaissance vases, and this extensive illustration opening of the window to the outside is another Baroque trend here. But the way these ladies dressed, the way they sit on the seders, and the inner organization of the space with the sofa and divan, typical features of Turkish house. Then, architecturally speaking, Ottoman traditions mainly go on. This would be a good question for you in the final examination. What is the characteristic of 18th century Ottoman architecture? Traditional classical Ottoman architecture continued, while after the middle of the 18th century, decoration changed into Rococo. But still, architecture is traditional Ottoman. The main body is Ottoman. The compositional elements of the architectural space are Ottoman, but opening of the building by means of windows, introduction of ornamentational details, which are mainly Rococo, and also some Baroque details, undulating cornices, for example, or great eaves convoluting are Baroque elements. These Baroque and Rococo elements enhanced in the second half of the 18th century. In the first half of the 18th century, Ottoman designers struggled to integrate them and create an Ottoman royal style, a synthesis, as they did before. But unfortunately, after the second half of the 18th century, specifically in the 19th century, they kitted this idea, and European styles invaded Ottoman lands. What are these styles? Empire, neoclassicism, eclecticism, değil mi? Neo-Gothic. These European styles invaded Ottoman lands in the 19th century, up to the end of the 19th century, when a nationalistic style, the Neo-Ottoman style, appeared with architects like Mimar Kemalettin and Vedat Tek, Koyunoğlu, and others. This is the topic of the second semester. Peki. Another yalı from this is a palace. Now a yalı from from Emirgan is Şerifler. From outside, it is typically Ottoman with white eaves, wooden, and bay windows. But inside, it is almost entirely Rococo. Though we have classical Ayvan with sofa, typically Turkish, but decoration is Rococo. Some details from this decoration. İşte seashell, değil mi? Seashell. Kartuş, değil mi? Gold gilded details, and so forth. These are Rococo details. And a landscape painting. It's the first Western style painting introduced. In Nevşehir, Damat İbrahim Pasha introduced a great a külliye. Within this külliye, a avenue passes, and külliye is rendered a part of this road. This is not maybe unique, but one of the features of 18th century architecture. This külliye incorporates an avenue within its body. On the right is the Madrasa, Imaret, and Sibyan Mektebi. On the left is the mosque. This is on top of a hill. And down on the slope of the hill, underneath the mosque even, is a madrasa integrated. This madrasa is at the lower level, inserted within this slope of the hill. On the right is a bath. More important is the way this mosque is constructed. As I indicated, this is a return to early Ottoman architecture. Here we have Muradiye Bursa with its different parts, separated different parts, creating a mosque. This fragmentation is a feature of the early Ottoman architecture, 15th century, while in 16th century Şehzade, these parts strived to be synthesized, integrated by Mimar Sinan. Then this mosque from 18th century is closer in design understanding to early Ottoman architecture. It's a kind of revival of pre-classical architecture in Anatolia. Highly significant. This mosque, Hekimoğlu Ali Paşa Külliye, entered by means of a long corridor above which is a library. Across is the mosque. Pay attention. The mosque is diagonally placed, which is rare, really rare, except Şemsi Paşa Mosque in Üsküdar. Sinan did not try it. There is no axis controlling this design from the entrance to the gate of the mosque. This diagonal placement introduces a potential here in the garden. Here we have it, which is a Baroque feature. There's diagonal placement introduces lines in contradiction to each other. In a way, we don't have parallel lines. For example, a line can be drawn like this, another one, then we have a triangle here instead of a rectangle or a square or a circle, which are Renaissance features. We have here a kind of corruption of the Renaissance order. This is Baroque. This is Baroque. And diagonal placement, and also wide staircases and very high, creating a kind of distance, but at the same time introducing a perspective, as it is here, you can see, is another Baroque feature. Here we find in this courtyard. Here we have the library above the tunnel here. Outside of the külliye, we have a really great wall, since every element here are well proportioned and related to each other. You see, we have lost integration, we have lost features which are Sinanesque, I can say so, Sinanesque, yani işte, different parts related to each other by a proportional whole, a modular system. Also, this has been lost, disappeared. But now we have won something else. That is a feature which was not present in the age of Sinan. Outside organization of the outside facades after a proportional system, well-organized elements in relation to each other. Bakın, this is the grilled windows of the cemetery, mezarlık yani, and this is the fountain here and the Seville. How harmonious are these elements and the proportions provided in relation to individual elements. What I mean is that individual separate proportions of each element are in relation to the whole. This is a new trend that appeared, as if now designers expressing in a way expressing their creative mind by means of another realm of külliye. Before, it was the central mosque, the mosque itself. But now it is the garden walls, it is the courtyard walls, I mean, with their compositional elements in relation to the street, to the outside world. Now, the külliye is opening itself to the street, indirectly to the town. Değil mi? Şehre açılıyor. In a similar way, değil mi? What happened here? Neredeydi o? Sultana is the lady member of the palace. Sultanas, ladies, having mansions on the Bosphorus, opening their private life to the outside. It's a theater of life, as defined by Tülay Artan. You know, they are as if playing on the scene of a theater. You know, they are rendering themselves more visible, opening to the outside. Public sphere redefined. And külliye formation now, in this way, is another sign of this reality, opening of the külliye to the outside world, inside-outside relations totally changed. Bir şey kaybediyorsun, bir şey kazanıyorsun. Here we have some details. Again, we have features from traditional Seljuk Ottoman decoration, like this Rumi, but elongated arms of these scrolls. Değil mi? Bakın, uzatıyor böyle. Are Rococo features. Then how traditional embedded in the more global, clearly manifested here. Pay attention to the date, 1734. First half of the 18th century, when designers were looking ways to integrate. Yani şundan evvel yani. Görüyor musunuz? Şundan. Before that. Bakın. This is 1780s. A total eclipse. Fascination with Rococo. Now Sultan, bakın. Sultan Selim, this reformist Sultan, değil mi? French speaking. He was speaking French. This Sultan would like to create a room for his mother in French style. Look, bak. Sultan of the Muslims, yani an Islamic ruler. Great Ottoman Sultan. Ordering a room for his mother in the palace, not visible by anybody except themselves, in totally French style. You see how changed this royal, how can I say, culture? Yeah. Nereden nereye? Hekimoğlu Ali Pasha was a sadrazam in the first half of the 18th century. Another building which is important is Nur Osmaniye Mosque, Light of the Ottomans, Nur Osmaniye. It is symbolic of these changing times. Now it is built next to the bazaar as a gift presented to the traders. Now traders are more intercontinental, goods sold in these palaces, in these bazaars, are also Western goods and so forth. I mean, then probably because of this changing social composition, we have more Rococo, more Baroque features in this monument. For example, this courtyard. Though it is not a oval courtyard, it's a horseshoe-shaped courtyard, but it is unique. It is unique. Having an oval horseshoe-shaped courtyard is unique. It's a direct reference to Baroque architecture. Architect is a Greek origin man, Simeon Kalfa, and his name is still preserved with a reference to his Greek origin, Christian origin. Now it is possible for a Greek to keep his origins with his name. Before, Sinan probably was an Armenian or Greek, probably a Greek, local Greek, converted to Islam, became an Ottoman, now he's a great Muslim. A transformation took place. Without becoming as such, he wouldn't be a royal architect. I mean, this transformation, you know, he now speaking Turkish, becoming a Muslim, you know, an ardent Muslim. Even he was probably a Bektashi, member of the royal architects, even its head. Now, in the 18th century, Simeon Kalfa, keeping his own identity as a Christian with his name, active in professional architectural scenery and designing a mosque in Baroque style. How this could be happen? How could this be? Could this happen? Since now ruling class, you know, the palace, opened its gates to Western influence, and minority groups were given rights, not exposed rights. I mean, generally accepted rights, but hidden rights in a way to go on with their identities and participate in social life. Levantines is a sign of this, also minority groups active in trade and so forth. Anyway, the architect is a Greek origin man, Simeon Kalfa. This got diagonal placement of the mosque in relation to the Grand Bazaar. This circulation path from the Grand Bazaar, the main street of the Grand Bazaar, opens this small courtyard or small square. From there, you can enter the mosque and pass through the gardens of the mosque and reach to Cağaloğlu. And today, everybody who visits this Kapalı Çarşı passes by means of these roads, which is not possible in a 16th century külliye. 16th century külliye is a very enclosed compound. Nobody would easily pass through it. I mean, it was not at least designed to incorporate a passageway. It's far from the crowded urban center on top of a hill. Now it is deliberately inserted within the town, within the urban center, within the trade center, very close to the covered bazaar. And these shops underneath the garden of the mosque. Mosque is higher than the level of the shops, is a clear sign of the fact that Danır, Sultan Mahmud, would like to have this külliye be a part of the Grand Bazaar. There's even this notion, which is not original. We have it earlier in Tahtakale, Rüstem Pasha Mosque, which is not original 18th century, but I don't know. A Sultan Mosque, unusually placed, very close to the Grand Bazaar. I don't know. I mean, these are, you know, beyond sometimes realities. I mean, we interpret some of the features. This is one of them. But it is significant to have really a grand mosque in the 18th century commissioned next to the covered bazaar. And before its construction began, a number of khans were even demolished in this place, a number of khans demolished. And it displays us the fact that Sultan now would like to be closer to his trader subjects. Tüccarlara yakın olmak istiyor artık. Here we have the oval courtyard, great cornices with Baroque features. And this facade, side facade, this facade bakın, has nothing to do with a mosque now. It looks like a palace facade. Then the limits, the line separating residential architecture from mosque architecture now eliminated. It looks like a church. It looks like a palace, you see, instead of a mosque now. This is another feature of 18th century Ottoman Baroque, if it is there. Wide cornices, convoluting cornices, as you can see here at the corner. Very strange arts. Dilimli kemer, we say. Değil mi? English, lobed, with the lobed arts. Elongated windows altogether. Classical proportions of Mimar Sinan entirely gone. We have something else here. Really, we have something else here. This heavy marble usage, which gives the essentially the characteristic of a palace facade, altogether are new. This is the oval courtyard, which is not oval actually; it's just horseshoe shaped, but essentially the idea is there: oval courtyard. But these arches are also horseshoe shaped. This could be a reference to Damascus Grand Mosque. We don't know, but this Islamic character is always there. Since inside we have great inscriptions, essentially hadith of Prophet Muhammad, and references to early Islamic lands like Syria are there. As I told you, this hybridity, you know, Eastern lands and West altogether is a feature of 18th century Ottoman architecture. Bakın, this is a Baroque element. This convoluting cornice. You can compare this convolution with the Bernini's San Andrea Curnale. You see similar organization of wide cornices, undulating forms. This is Rococo. This is Baroque, yani. I put this slide just to show you the fact that this is Baroque. I mean, this detail is Baroque. While in this cornice we have acanthus flowers, acanthus leaves, typically, you know, 18th century features, the shell motif, seashell motif, cartouches, and so on. These are Rococo features, cartouche. C and S scrolls, yani C ve S. C and S scrolls is another feature of Rococo ornamentation. We have them here, bakın. C, C, I don't see any S. Here we have an S, bakın, S scrolls. Then we have in a niche all features of Rococo, but no Mukarnas. We have Mukarnas niche with Rococo features. Mukarnas gone. Where is our Mukarnas? So symbolic of Islamic architecture. Mukarnas gone, but niche is still there. They insist to have the niche. This is traditional, you know, compositional order. Niche over the gates or over the mihrab. You need to have a niche. But where is the Mukarnas there inside? No, I mean, we have a new trend. Neydi adı? Neydi işte? Nevuslup yani. Nevuslup. We should also have it here. This is the global trend, and this will make us, you know, more in tune with the new trends. Result, what happened? Ulama rejected this. We know this from Western travelers' accounts, that intellectuals, Ottoman intellectuals, rejected this. They didn't like it. They didn't like the Osmaniye. And the Osmaniye became a one-time experience. At least they didn't demolish it. It is still there, you can visit. But it remained a one-time experience. In the second half of the 18th century, the mosques now, Mehmet Tahir Ağa is the architect, like Laleli Mosque, are in more of Ottoman classical tradition. I will be showing you one example, because ulama rejected this extreme Rococo in mosque architecture. But in the residential buildings, in details, in some details, you can have it. But this great oval courtyard, this extensive Rococo decoration was not likened by ulema. Here's inside, palace-like interior, but a great inscription zone on this cornice and hadith of Prophet Muhammad and small columns, attached columns, pilasters, all along the walls, reminding arcades of Kaaba, Mecca, arcades of Kaaba in Mecca, I mean, are the Islamic elements. We always find this contradiction, you know, Islamic tradition and Rococo, Baroque elements. And this is Laleli. Now, Taira is introduced a classical baldachin with a dome. This is also a classical baldachin with a dome. Nur Osmani is also classical baldachin with a dome, but extensive Baroque features and a great oval courtyard. Here we have in Laleli a similar organization of a baldachin, octagonal, I suppose, or hexagonal. I don't really remember. Hexagonal. It must be hexagonal. A hexagonal baldachin with a dome. Compartmentalization, yani fragmentation is here, like the previous examples of the 18th century. We have white cornices. But when you look inside, go inside, you see Rococo and Baroque elements are not here. They are eliminated from the interior because ulema objected it. Ulema did not like Nur Osmani's extensive Baroque and Rococo. And outside of this building, we have some Baroque elements like white cornices and some other features like these convoluting cornices and so forth. But they are restricted now, And this great Ottoman impression you get from this monument puts it in the tradition of classical architecture. Now it's a return to classicism of 16th century, but again with Baroque and Rococo elements. Yeah, and it is more Ottoman, I should say so. More Ottoman than Nur Osmani. Another feature of the 18th century is the material employed. We start to see brick employed as a construction material now. I can show you here and there. Brick alternating with stone, which is a local feature, local Byzantine. It is cheaper, but this is not the only reason. Economy is not the only reason. Another reason, as I told you, is a revival of early Ottoman and Byzantine traditions in this age of stagnation. It's a courtyard with arcades, fucking rounded arches. You wouldn't find this in a Sinan building. Arches are always pointed. Some details. These are original capitals from 18th century with Rococo features. This undulation is a Baroque feature and so forth. Interior, I already showed you. You wouldn't feel yourself in a Baroque building inside. It is traditional, more Sinanesque than 18th century. And its fountain with a white eave, typical features of Rococo. While in the mosque, Baroque and Rococo are more restrained, more restricted. On the Sebel, architect exposed himself. Okay, I mean, this I like more maybe in the 18th century. Now, this is a new style. I encourage it, my master craftsmen to make this. You see how Rococo it is here, this great cartouche, and the white eave, which is a Baroque feature altogether, is more Western. Bunu karşılaştırmak için koydum, just to compare those two. And Atif Efendi Library, many libraries opened in 18th century in the Ottoman capital, many libraries. This is a new trend in the age of enlightenment. Really, Ottomans also started to encourage education and not maybe research, but reading and learning. And libraries served this purpose. Look at this architecture. It is almost entirely Byzantine, alternating bricks and stones, bay windows in relation to this turning road. Nice, very nice facade from this perspective, you see. a building adapted to the streets, having the contours of the streets. It's also turning like the street itself. Then this is the facade where librarians lived. This is the house facade where librarians lived. At the back of this facade is the library. I didn't put the photograph of the library, but the house where librarians lived. Library is in the gardens at the back of this facade. And residential units from 18th century. Probably these units also built in the 16th century Istanbul. These are living units, houses from Balat, probably belong to the minority members, Greeks and Jews of Istanbul, and following a Byzantine tradition in its construction style and material. These are local buildings, probably most symbolic of Istanbul in their architecture. Only a few remained in Istanbul today. If you go to Balat, to Golden Horn, some of them still visible, very close to neydi o üniversitenin adı? Has mıydı? Halis.
Kadir Has olabilir mi hocam?
Kadir Has, bravo. Kadir Has'ın karşısında bunlar. Hemen, yani oraya yakın daha doğrusu. One of them converted into the Museum of Women Studies. Nereden nereye yani? Bu kadın çalışmaları kütüphanesi. Women Studies. Some others restored. Some others demolished during urban planning attempts in the time of Dalan, Bedrettin Dalan. But visible examples exist. Not only here, at Tahtakale also, we have some examples, parts of the Hans. White eaves, white cornices, testere dişi, sawtooth cornices, bay windows, and so forth are the general. The first floor usually contains a staircase and storage place, and up you reach to a sofa with rooms opening to it. Typical features of these Istanbul residential units. And Bursa Orhan Gazi Mosque, how this great early Ottoman architecture followed this pattern, later transformed into this, işte, nereden nereye değil mi? But we have the influence of early Ottoman architecture in the construction material. And we can say that Byzantine tradition continued in early Ottoman architecture, entirely changed in 16th century, reached to a distinct European style. After the 18th century, we have a revival of Byzantine and early Ottoman traditions in Istanbul. This hybridity we see is that, and this is a original church, Byzantine church, with the features we find in 18th century. Why? Is it because of minority members now contributing to architecture with their local knowledge now? Probably one of the reasons. Or due to economic reasons, we have now bricks also employed in monumental architecture by the Ottomans, and this brick use normally, naturally introduced earlier technologies. There should be different reasons for that. Oh my God, it has been an adventure with you to inspect, to survey Islamic architecture, which is really great. I hope you enjoyed it. This is the end of my lecture series from the last week of this semester. If you have any questions, we will be glad to reply. Otherwise, I will be ending this session. I thank you for your participation, my students sending messages. The final examination will be the same with the midterm, the same format. I hope you will all manage to pass. If you have any questions, you can also ask later, me or Orçun or Nesrin. I specifically thank Orçun and Nesrin for helping us to organize this lecture series, for their participation. I greatly appreciate. And my students who almost, in majority, almost every lecture, around 100 in the beginnings, even more than 100, 120, later 180. But 80 is a really great number at the end of the semester. Thank you very much. And I wish you success in your project presentations and final examinations. Hope to see you in the future somewhere. Bye-bye.
Teşekkür ederiz hocam. Görüşmek
Teşekkürler
üzere.
hocam. Görüşürüz.
Sevgiler herkese.
İyi dönemler arkadaşlar.
İyi de.
Kolay gelsin arkadaşlar. Görüşmek üzere.